All right, well, hey, good morning. For those of you who may not know, my name's Robbie. I am the senior minister here at Gateway, and I'm excited to jump into what we're talking about this morning. We're continuing our series called How to Neighbor, and before we even really jump too far into it, I want to ask you this question. What is a song that the first time you heard it, or maybe for years after you heard it, you misheard the lyrics, and you heard it sang incorrectly, and so for some reason what you thought you heard, it made sense in your mind, and so you just went along for years thinking that these were the lyrics to this song. Maybe a classic example of that would be the song Bad Moon Rising by Creedence Clearwater Revival. Instead of hearing "There's a bad moon on the rise," how many of you heard "There's a bathroom on the right"? Right? That's what I heard for years hearing that song. My parents listened to oldies all the time. I heard it all the time. That's what I thought it was for years and years and years. Another good example would be "We Will Rock You" by Queen. There's that part in the song where it says, "You got mud on your face, you big disgrace," and then my favorite line of the whole song, "Kicking your cat all over the place." It's can, it's not cat. I like the cat version better, to be honest. But there was one of those, I heard it wrong for years and years and years. And that was just the way I thought it was. And it happens with church songs, too. It happens with songs that we hear in church. I remember hearing my grandma in her house when we would go to visit. My grandma would always sing this hymn to herself. It's the hymn "In the Garden." And in that song, the chorus says, "And he walks with me, and he talks with me." And I would hear her sing that, and I never said anything, but I always thought to myself, Grandma, does Grandpa know that you've been sneaking off to the garden with this Andy fella? I don't know who Andy is, but I don't know why you're sneaking off to the garden with him, because I just misheard it. It didn't make sense. Or maybe there was the other song that we sang in church a lot about that poor bear, that Gladly, I think was his name, Gladly the cross-eyed bear. I don't know why we sang about a cross-eyed bear, but that was how I heard it. See, that phenomenon, that thing that happens to us, it's actually a really common thing. And it's so common that it has a name. It's called, when that happens, it's called a mondegreen. A mondegreen is when we mishear a word or a phrase, and it makes sense in our head, but it's actually completely incorrect. It's not what was said at all. And we can all think of our own examples of that. And maybe it's not a song even. Maybe it's just mishearing somebody as you're talking. Whenever that happens, whenever you come across a mondegreen, that's a great example of how important it is to listen. See, in this series, we've been talking about how to neighbor, and more specifically, we've been talking about how to love our neighbors as ourselves. And I want to encourage you, as we talk about that idea, loving our neighbors as ourselves, don't overthink it. Let's just start with our actual neighbors. Instead of trying to figure out, okay, who's my neighbor, let's just start with our actual neighbors, the people who live along us. Actually, if you haven't been here the last couple of weeks, you feel free to grab one of those magnets that's in the seats around you. They say, "Who is my neighbor?" on them, and they have a chart. And take that home as just a reminder. Put it on your fridge, put it somewhere as a reminder to you to get to know the people who actually live around you. See, it's a great place to start, but it doesn't mean that only applies to your literal neighbors. I mean, it could mean your coworkers or your classmates or people that you just see often in the places you go regularly. See, most of this series is focused not on so much who we neighbor, but on how we neighbor. As we talk about how to neighbor people, we've been going through an acronym. The acronym is BLESS, and each letter stands for a different practice that we see modeled in the life of Jesus. And these are practices that he lived out and that are examples for us of how to love our neighbor as ourselves. And to be honest, even if you're not a follower of Jesus, if you would just implement these regular practices into your life, you would find your life being far more enriched and the lives of the people around you being far more enriched if you could just jump into practicing these simple things. So Last week, if you were here last week, you heard Ben. He kicked off the acronym with B, that idea of beginning with prayer. And if you weren't here, I encourage you, go online, go back and watch it. He did a fantastic job talking to us about how important it is for us that when we're going to love our neighbor as ourselves, to begin by seeking the Lord and asking Him to show us what He would have us do. And so this week, we're moving on to that second letter, to the L in bless. And the L stands for listen. See, you and I, we live in a world where hardly anybody seems to really listen to each other anymore. We are so much more interested in what we have to say than what they have to say or what other people have to say. There's this saying, it goes like this: the opposite of listening is not speaking, it's waiting to speak. See, I often catch myself in a conversation where, if I'm honest, I'm not really listening. Instead, I'm just kind of going over the next thing I'm going to say. And I'm not really paying attention to what that person is saying to me. And you probably do that too. And even if you don't do that, I know that you know what it's like to be on the other end of that. You know what it's like to be the person in a conversation who's not really being listened to. That other person has glazed over eyes and you're just getting a lot of from them. See, when no one is listening, we've all felt this before, we feel unheard. And when we feel unheard, we feel unknown. And when we feel unknown, we feel unloved. See, is there anything more disingenuous than when you're talking to somebody and they're not listening, but yet they claim that you're important to them? They might as well be one of those like automated customer service lines. You know the ones I'm talking about, where you call a business, you call customer service to get help with a certain thing, and it's a recording, and they're telling you, if you want to talk to this person or you've got this issue, press 1 or press 2. And then you do that, and you get through like a series of press this, press that, and then they put you on hold. And they put on some elevator music that is like way too loud in the receiver all the time. And then just when you're about to hang up, what do they say? A recording comes on and they say, your call is important to us. Please stay on the line. And you're like, no, it's not. I know that it's not. If my call was important to you, I'd be talking to a person right now. Now, I know what some of you are thinking as we talk about this idea of listening. Some of you have been thinking like, okay, we started off blessed with beginning with prayer, and now we're talking about listening. Like, I was kind of hoping for something maybe a little bit more action-oriented, maybe a little bit more assertive. I mean, yeah, I know that these are practices that we see in the life of Jesus, but they're kind of basic. Like, these are things that we all probably know how to do. But what's so interesting about these is that as we flip through the life of Jesus, we look at the 4 accounts of Jesus' life in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When we read about the things that Jesus did in His life, we are naturally more drawn to the kind of the over-the-top, amazing things that Jesus did. Like, it's awesome to read about Jesus feeding 5,000 people, and it's incredible to hear about Him healing people and even bringing people back from the dead. And so we're naturally drawn to those incredible, exceptional, extraordinary moments. But when we look more closely at how Jesus modeled these blessed practices for us in His life, it's in His more simple, ordinary interactions with people that these things that we talk about, that's where they tend to show up. In fact, in the overwhelming majority of cases, those huge, incredible miracles that Jesus does come after He has an interaction with somebody where He takes a moment to pause and to give them His direct attention, undivided, and really listen to them. And that listening, it leads to the power of God being put on display through one of those miracles, those incredible things that we would all love to see happen. It always begins with Jesus having a conversation with somebody and really listening. And I am convinced that when we do this too, when we begin with prayer and then we move on to listening to people, that when we do that, God will show us where He is ready to work. And He will invite us not just to watch what's happening, but He'll actually invite us to be a part of it. As I mentioned, there's a ton of examples from Jesus' life when he took the time to slow down and to really listen to someone. And that listening led to an amazing work of God. One great example that we're going to look at this morning, we're going to begin in Luke chapter 18. So if you got a Bible, open it up, turn it on, do whatever you need to do to get there. We're going to have it on the screen as well. In Luke chapter 18, I'll kind of set the stage for you. Jesus is on his way to the city of Jericho. Jericho is like the last stop on his journey to Jerusalem. That's his end goal. He's going to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. Him and almost every other Jew in the area. Like that was like the major celebration of the Jewish faith, was to go to Jerusalem and celebrate the Passover. And so Jesus is passing through Jericho on his way there, along with thousands of other people that would have been there doing the same thing. And so Jesus is passing through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. There's this steady stream of people, just tons and tons of people all over the place. And yet look at what happens. We're in Luke chapter 18, beginning in verse 35. This is what it says. As Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard the crowd going by, he asked what was happening. They told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. He called out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Those who led the way rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and ordered the man to be brought to him. I don't want you to miss what's happening here. Jesus, just like everybody else, he has a destination in mind. He has a place that he's trying to get to. He has things that he needs to do, that he wants to do. He's not necessarily looking for somebody to heal that day. And yet, in the midst of all the commotion, Jesus, just like everybody else, he's just trying to pass through, but in the middle of all of it, he hears a single voice call out, have mercy on me. See, beggars were so common along this road, and especially this time of year when so many people were traveling. It was a great place for them to interact with people and to try and collect alms or charity and things like that. And so there would have been lots of beggars around. This is not the first beggar Jesus has passed on his trip. And yet Jesus hears this particular man, and he's compelled to stop. And he takes time to have the man brought to him. Notice what I said there. He takes time. He doesn't make time. He takes time with him. See, for a lot of us, this is the first step if we're going to really listen to somebody, is to take time. To stop, put down your phone, turn off Netflix, slow down the busyness of your life so that you can give your full attention to somebody. Now, I know you got stuff going on. I got stuff going on. And a lot of that stuff, most of that stuff, is stuff that we feel like has to get done. And Jesus had that too, but yet Jesus never treated the people who interrupted what he was doing, he never treated them as if they were an interruption. Because they weren't. People in genuine need are never an interruption. And so it's not about having time. It's about taking the time to talk, to listen to somebody. Jesus, who was way busier and had way more people vying for his time than you or I, Jesus took time to engage this man personally. One of my favorite authors, Dallas Willard, says the first act of love is always the giving of attention. But come on, we know what's going to happen here, right? Like we know what Jesus does in these situations. The man calls out to Jesus. Jesus is going to stop. He's going to heal him. End of story. Matter of fact, we could just skip there right now. Let's do that. Down to verse 42. Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has healed you. Immediately, he received his sight and followed Jesus, praising God. When all the people saw it, they also praised God. Yay! That's what we expect. Jesus does the Jesus-y thing. He heals the man. The man calls out to Jesus for help. Jesus hears him, heals him. The man becomes a follower of Jesus, and everyone around praises God because of it. Now this story, that Jesus doing that, it's an amazing display of his divinity. It's an amazing display of his power. Jesus does what only God can do. That's a big deal. That is the reason that Luke wrote this story down, and it's the reason that Mark and Matthew wrote it down in their Gospels as well. But, see, the thing is that that's what provided what is the thing that provided the opportunity for Jesus to display his power? Look at the couple verses right before that. Let's go back to verse 40. So Jesus stopped and ordered the man to be brought to him. When he came near, Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Lord, I want to see," he replied. See, it's easy for us to miss that. It's easy for us to skip over that. When we read this story, we usually just kind of skip over this part as like, oh, well, of course that happened. But we need to slow down and realize, like, this is huge. Jesus asks a question. Why? He's Jesus. Like, he knows the answer. Jesus is Jesus. He knows that the guy is blind. He knows what he wants. And so this question that Jesus asks him, it shows us something that's actually really profound about Jesus' character. He asks this man so that he could listen to the man's answer. He didn't assume that he already knew, and he doesn't want you to assume that you know what people need either. So Jesus asks questions. He asked a question so that he could listen. And this is something you see over and over throughout Jesus' life. Did you know Jesus asked other people 307 questions that are recorded in the Gospels. Do you know how many questions he answered? 3. He asked 307 questions when he would interact with people, and when he would be asked questions, he only answered them 3 times. See, Jesus is Jesus. He could have healed this guy without ever talking to him if he wanted to. He could have healed the guy before the guy even asked him to. But there was something valuable about the interaction. There's something valuable that happens when we take time to ask questions and then to listen. See, that's how you really get to know people. Earlier we talked about how when we feel unheard, we feel unknown. And when we feel unknown, we feel unloved. But when we take the time to ask questions and to listen, people become known and then they feel loved. David Augsburger, he says this: being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person that they are almost indistinguishable. And so we ask questions. And when we ask people questions, what do we talk about? Well, how do you get to know people? You ask questions about their history. Tell me your story. Where did you grow up? Tell me about your life. Tell me about your family. Tell me about, what you do for a living. We ask questions about their history. And as we get to know them more, we ask some more questions. We ask questions about their habits. Well, what are you into? What do you like to do in your spare time? What's your favorite team? What's your favorite vacation spot? What's one of your favorite restaurants? And we get to know what people like to do and how they spend their time. And then as you get to know them better, eventually you get to a place where you're able to ask about their hurts. And you're able to ask, well, how are you doing with this situation? How are you doing with this loss? How are you doing with this struggle? How are you doing with this obstacle that I know just kind of dropped down in your life? And you ask about hurts. See, these are the types of questions that when we ask them to people and we really listen, they help us become a great listener. So when I say to ask questions and to listen to people, you need to understand, though, that I'm talking about more than just listening to the words that come out of their mouth. I'm talking about more than just gathering information about them. Not only do we listen to the facts, like that's important, but we also want to make sure that we're listening to their heart. What are their fears? What are their dreams? What are their longings? What is the need behind the story that they tell you? Are they lonely? They have broken relationships? Are they traumatized? Have they been betrayed? Are they untrusting? Are they dealing with poor health? See, a lot of times when we listen to people's hearts, when we listen to the story behind the story, the need behind the story, a lot of times that's not something that comes out in the actual conversation. It's something that happens more indirectly. You pick up on it through tone of voice and body language. As you get to know the hope that they have for their lives, the way they would like to see their life going, and you begin to notice the areas where their life isn't measuring up to what they hope it to be, or you know about something that happens in their life that's going to disrupt the way they hope their life would be, then we begin to see their heart. What is the need behind the information that you hear from them when you ask questions? This takes a thing called emotional intelligence to figure out. And the thing about emotional intelligence is you can't develop it in a hurry. My first ministry, the first church that I ever worked for, was a church in my wife's hometown, Rapid City, South Dakota. I was a youth pastor there for about 5 years before I ended up taking another job, and our family moved down to Georgia. And I remember the first time we traveled back to South Dakota to visit my wife's family after we had moved to Georgia. We were at her parents' house. Jackie's mom was making dinner, and she realized that whatever we were having for dinner that night, I don't remember what it was, but she was missing like a really vital ingredient. Like we could not have dinner without this thing. Like she thought she had this, started making dinner and realized, we're out of, I don't even remember what it was, whatever it was. And so they asked me, they said, hey, can you run to the store real quick and pick up some of this stuff that we really need? And the store was only like 2 blocks away. It wasn't going to delay dinner a whole lot. So I was like, of course I will, sure. So I go to the store, and while I'm in the store, like, mind you, I'm trying to be in and out, like as fast as I can. I go in, and I ran into a member from the church that I had worked at previously. And I had to go, and to be honest, the guy that I ran into, I don't really like him that much. He was kind of a cranky guy. And so I ran into him, and I'm trying to make small talk and be polite, but at the same time, like, I'm really looking for a way to duck out of this conversation as quick as I can. I got to go. I had stuff to do. And so he's asking about how the family's doing, and all I'm saying is like the real generic, oh, they're good. Yep, we love Georgia. It's great. You know, like trying to just kind of like move things along a little bit. But I wanted to be polite, and so I asked how he was doing. And he began to tell me about his leg. He had this terrible leg infection, like to the point where the doctors were talking about amputating his leg. And so that made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to talk about that. So I asked about his wife. How's she doing? His wife had been a shut-in the entire time I had worked at the church. I'd actually never met her. And so I asked him about her, thinking maybe things would like get a little more positive, because I didn't want to leave on a negative note, like, oh, your leg, sorry, and just run out the door. So I'm trying to search for something, and so I asked about his wife's health. And he tells me that his wife's health had taken a really bad turn. Again, I'm looking for a positive. Well, like, you know, what kind of treatment can they do for it? Nothing. There's really nothing that they can do. Oh, man, well, at least you have family around you, right? No. Family's all estranged. Didn't want to end on a downer, so I'm still fishing for light. I'm still fishing for some positive thing that will let me get out of this conversation. Well, at least she's not going to be suffering. Nope. She's going to have a lot of suffering. She's going to have a lot of pain. There's nothing they can do. She's going to have a long downhill until eventually she dies. Still could be maybe a year or more, is what he told me. And then I said the thing that I will never forget, and I promise I will never say again. And I should have known better, because it started with those 3 terrible words, well, at least. I said, well, at least you know she'll be with Jesus when it happens. And he just goes, yeah, I guess so. And you could see the tone and his body language shifted, and I knew immediately, oh, that was terrible. I so easily could have just said, hey, can I pray with you right now? Would have been quick. Would have helped him know that he was cared for and loved. So the conversation ends I leave feeling like a total jerk. This guy had been sharing his heart with me, and I was too busy, too concerned with what I needed to get done to notice. I was too uncaring to slow down and listen to his heart. And I would never see him again before both he and his wife would pass away. And so when I think back to that, I hear the words of Proverbs 18, verse 13, ringing in my head. This is what it says: to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. Folly and shame, that's a nice way of saying it's stupid and it's embarrassing. Yep, sure is. Take time. Ask questions. Listen to the heart of people. But it's more than just listening to the heart of people. You can listen to more than the hearts of people. Do you know you can listen to the heart of a place too? We see Paul do this in the second half of the book of Acts. The book of Acts, the second half, records Paul's journey throughout modern-day Turkey and Greece. He's spreading the good news of Jesus. And in Acts 17, he finds himself in Athens. Athens was like a cultural hub, a center of philosophy. The people of Athens had this deep pride in their rich cultural heritage. See, the people there loved to hear and to talk about the newest ideas. And so Paul's posture and the way he engages with the city, we're going to take just a quick look at it. It gives us incredible insight into how we can love not only our individual neighbors, but our entire neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, and city. See, Paul begins his work by taking time to ask questions and to listen. He spends time in the marketplace. He wanted to better understand the people of the place he was trying to reach. So he spent time in the marketplace debating, asking questions, and listening. And he shares with the people there about Jesus, and they're interested. They want to know more, so they take him to the meeting called the Areopagus. The Areopagus is basically, it's a committee of like 24 leading philosophers and elders of the city. It's the most respected people in Athens. And when Paul is before them, kind of telling them what's going on, here's how Paul describes his approach to them. This is what it says in Acts chapter 17, in verse 22. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and that is what I am going to proclaim to you." See, Paul knew that the Athenians, he knew that they wanted knowledge more than they wanted anything else. And so he used the fact that they worshiped a God they did not know to tell them about the God that they could know. He listened to them. He observed the city so that when he got the opportunity to speak in their most influential forum, he was ready. And when he did, what happened? Skip down to verse 13. Verse 34. Acts 17:34. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. See, here's the thing. When we listen to the people and the places around us, we learn where the power of God is ready to be displayed. A couple weeks ago, when we began this series, you remember I told you about some neighbors of mine. They were neighbors of ours in Georgia. They were the ones with like the really nice yard that were just really invested in their yard. So shortly after we moved in and we had like this initial not great experience with them, Jackie and I started praying. We started praying for them. But to be honest, we prayed like for months and months and didn't really have much progress. Like we wanted to get to know them a little bit, but didn't really have much of an opportunity. They kept on working in their yard all the time, like literally every day when we would come home from work, at least one of the couple is an older couple, one of them would be in the yard. And sometimes we'd give them like some quick hellos as we walked from our car to the house. But for the most part, we didn't really interact. We continued praying for them. And then one day, when I came home from work, I looked over and instead of seeing at least one of them working in the yard, they were both just sitting on their porch. I had never seen that before. And so I was like, they're just hanging out. Maybe, all right, God, maybe this is a good opportunity. So I walked over and began to talk with them. And we began to chat a little bit to get to know each other a little bit more. And as we did, like, they told me all kinds of stuff about themselves. I heard the story about how they got together, like it's straight out of a romance novel. Like they had known each other as little kids and kind of lost touch, and then they spotted each other in a New York City subway station from like across the subway, and it was like that John and Martha moment where they're running towards each other, like, oh, they had that experience. This is an amazing story. And I began to get to know them and to listen to them. And at the end of the conversation, because I needed to get back in, go inside and see the family and things like that, I just asked, like, hey, I'm about to head home. Is there anything I can be praying about for you? And they began to tell me about how the husband, his name was Clifton. That Clifton had this really serious, maybe life-threatening medical condition. And that he was going to be seeing a specialist in the coming week. There might be surgery, in line, that he might be having to have this really serious surgery. If he has the surgery, he was going to be out of work, could possibly lose his job. And so I just prayed for him. Said, hey, thanks for telling me. Can I just pray with you guys right now? Because I do this thing where I tell people I pray for them, but then I forget to later. So I didn't want that to happen. So I'll just pray for you right now. And so I prayed for him, and I went home and I forgot about him. And I didn't pray about it again. About 2 weeks later, I'm out mowing the lawn. Clifton's wife, her name is Rita. She's standing at the fence and she waves me over. Tells me that he had his appointment with the specialist. His condition is completely gone. Doctors can't explain it. They don't know what happens. Now, I want to be clear. I don't know that my prayer for them, did anything. God certainly could have been planning to heal him all along, and maybe he would have, I don't know. But here's how God definitely did use. This is how he did use the willingness to take time and to ask questions and to listen to their heart. See, these short hellos began to turn into real conversations from there on out. Our relationship began to grow. About a year and a half later, one of their adult children was having a really intense mental health crisis. And they came over to our house and talked with us, told us everything that was going on, asked us to pray for them. We prayed with them, helped them call the police. Their child got help. And our relationship with them continued to grow deeper and deeper. See, when we listen to the people and the places around us, we learn where the power of God is ready to be displayed. In Jesus' life, he heard one man's voice in a crowd of people, and he asked, well, what do you want me to do? Paul, he loved the people of Athens so much that he was willing to slow down and to listen before he spoke. Every single day, you come into contact with people who may be feeling unheard and unknown and unloved. Matter of fact, God has intentionally placed you in your neighborhoods, in your workplaces, in your schools, and in your city for those people. So let's take Jesus' words and his actions to heart. Let's really listen to the people and the places around us. And when we do, you'll begin to see where God is ready to display his power, and you just might get to be a part of it. But if you won't listen, well, you can't love your neighbor without listening. Let's pray together. Father, we love you. Thank you so much for the example you give us in Jesus. God, thank you for your heart for hurting people. That when people came to you with stuff that maybe wasn't on your agenda, you didn't see them as an interruption, but you saw it as an opportunity to display your power. God, would you help us to do the same? Would you help us to slow down and make time for the people around us every single day who may be going through life wondering if anybody cares? Wondering if there's a God who sees and knows them, but if there's even a person who sees and knows them. God, help us to slow down, to take time and ask questions and to listen to their heart, because when we do, man, people will tell us how to serve them. God, help us to be like you. Help us to love and to lead and to live like Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen.